Welcome to Catholic Economics. Today is July 25th, 2020, and I'm your host, Levi Russell. Today I want to talk about the just price, and I'm going to rely on some information from one of the recent Leonine Institute publications, which I'll leave a link to in the show notes. And I'm going to tackle this from a couple of different angles. I'm also going to have an article, an economics journal article by Father Bernard Dempsey that goes through the history of the concept of the just wage and explains pretty well, I think, Aquinas's perspective and those who kind of came after Aquinas. So look for those. The Dempsey article, you'll have to, I'll put a link, but you'll have to find it via some kind of university resource or some kind of resource like that. But if you can't access it, then please let me know. You can send me an email or you can contact me on Twitter and I'll figure out how to get it to you. Before I get started on all that, I want to remind you that I have support links in the show notes. You can support the podcast through Anchor, and there should be links for that if you're using a podcast app. You can also check out my Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can also, there's a tip jar in there. If you're listening on YouTube, that's great. I appreciate it. Please share and all of that. But also, I run an ad at the end of each episode on the podcast. So if you download it on a podcast app, that helps me out too. I'm really trying to make this and the Institute a bigger part of my my daily life because we're getting pay cuts at work and things with universities are pretty crazy. So anyway, I'll get started now. So the just price is an important concept in Catholic social teaching, and Father Pesch, in his book, Ethics in the National Economy, tells us that the writing on usury, the Church's perspective on usury comes from a similar logic that, as similar to the just price. And so, just price is a very important thing for us to be talking about. And thankfully, one of the research associates with the Leonine Institute sent us a submission on the just price, and we were happy to publish that very recently here. And so I'm gonna leave a link to that article. It's very short. It's what we call at the Institute a position paper, and so it's intended to just simply lay out our perspective on some important topic within Catholic social teaching, and to make it understandable to a wide audience and to be useful for politicians if they're looking for some kind of a position on an issue. So the great thing about this piece, I think, is that it focuses on just price from the perspective of profit. So I'm going to take two perspectives today when I lay this out for just price. So Anthony Gentile, who is he's a seminarian up in the Northeast that has who laid this out. And I think he did a great job explaining the just price from the perspective of profit. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that he's laying out what the practical measurement should be in an economy for us to determine whether or not the price of something is just. And so what he talks about here is that he talks about the concept of selling something for more than it's worth, right? And so how do we deal with that morally? How do we think about that? So putting aside the issue of determining what it's worth for a second, right? So we got to determine what it's worth, but let's put that aside for a second. So he explains very carefully in here, I think, that if you have two people in a transaction, well, we don't want any kind of deceit, right? We don't want he uses Peter and John. So if Peter sells something to John at a price above its value, then Peter has, by deceit, then Peter has done something bad to John, right? So so if you fool someone into paying too much money for something, you've committed a sin against them, right? This is a bad thing. And also, if you, on the other side of the transaction, right, if John buys something from Peter and he deceives Peter and pays less than the value of that thing to Peter, right? Again, he has committed a sin against Peter, and so this is not a good thing, right? So if we have a situation where someone has an advantage over someone, this is another issue, right? So we have this deceit issue, and of course, if we don't have deceit involved, then we kind of have to think about a slightly different way of going about this. So one of the other things that's really important in Catholic social teaching is the sort of power over someone else, right? And so, and the popes really discuss this well, I think, and it can sound a bit lefty to people, and so I want to tread lightly here when I'm explaining this, but like I've said in the past, you have to really get your head out of this framing of left versus right and the way secular politics works and the way secular politics ends up making us think, and we need to think about social policy and economic policy in the way that the church is asking us to think about them. So one of the things that's relevant to the just prices is power in the transaction, right? So if we have Peter and John, and Peter has, for some reason, some kind of big advantage over John, and he uses that to make John pay more, right? Pay Peter more money for that good. Then the use of that power is also a violation of the just price, right? So if so we can talk about in economics things like sort of market power, right? That's where we go to immediately for this. So knowledge of the value of the thing itself could be a power situation. It could be a situation where maybe Peter is John's employer, right? And so he has advantages over John in other areas. That he might, John might fear retaliation from Peter, and so he pays a lower price because he's afraid if he doesn't, request, he doesn't force Peter to charge him a fair price for that thing, then he'll, then Peter will enact some kind of revenge on him or something like that, right? So I think we have to be cognizant of these power relationships. So then Mr. Gentile goes into a discussion of more explicitly about profit. And in Catholic social teaching, profit is okay. And by profit, we mean, something paid to the owner of a business or something like that, right? So we have different ways of describing profit, accounting profit being simply the amount of money left over from revenue after all the expenses are paid. But then in economics, we have these other cost concepts like opportunity cost and things like this, right? And so my reading of this is that the church is totally fine with profit in either case. It's just, is that profit in line with justice, right? Were all of those transactions, all of those expense transactions, and those revenue transactions, were those completed in a just manner, right? And so the example that Mr. Gentile gives us is an iPhone 11. So he shows that the total cost of production outside of marketing and research and development, right? Because these are overhead, and so they're hard to sort of assign to, the specific value of a phone. But the production cost is $490, and that the sale price is almost $1,100. So that's crazy. That's a ton of money. And, sometimes they can get as high, if you have a little bit more memory in them or whatever, they can get up to $1,500, which is a lot of money for a phone, right? And if you think about this, the production cost doesn't change if it has, 512 gigabytes of memory or 64 gigabytes. I mean, the production cost isn't really going to change there. And so, is it plausible, that this, the profit is 2/3 of this transaction, right? 2/3 of that $1,500 price is profit. And obviously they're not just covering marketing and R&D with that. So, is it plausible that represents a just price for that product? It's kind of strange. to think through this, and I'm going to get to Dempsey stuff here in just a moment. But I think this is an important question, and it's possible that we could answer in the affirmative, right? We could answer in the affirmative and say, okay, maybe that is a just profit, and so maybe the $1,500 is a just price for an Apple iPhone, right? And I think we need to be cognizant of the difference between needs and wants as well. So if we're talking about someone making a 300% profit on food, I think that's a completely different, food or housing or basic transportation, basic things like this. I think that is a different scenario. Those are different discussions than maybe something. Maybe we consider an iPhone a luxury good. So maybe that part is relevant as well. So I think this is a great article. I think you should read it. I think it's got a lot of good information, and I think it makes us think very practically about the way a just price should be considered, and that that just profit is a very important part of just price. That there's nothing wrong with saying that there is excessive profit taking, and that we need to figure out, how, we need to figure out how to have leaders who are going to be able to practically apply this type of teaching. So in Father Dempsey's article, Father Bernard Dempsey was a Jesuit priest who was also an economist, and he got his PhD at Harvard under Joseph Schumpeter, which if you're into economics and all, and Austrian economics in specific, you'll recognize that name. But he was a professor at St. Louis University and at Marquette for a long time. And he's written several articles that I'm going to be talking more about as we go here. But for this specific episode, I want to touch on an article he wrote on the just price. And what he does in this article is he starts with the Greeks, and he starts with Augustine. And he talks about this concept of the just price and how it's sort of changed over time. And of course, he discusses Aquinas, because Aquinas is obviously a giant for any kind of moral theology. And he goes through and essentially by the end of the article, he has kind of laid out three things that from his point of view are determinant of the just price, right? So now we're going to be talking about the value of that good, right? So before I was talking about more practical issues like profit and sort of simpler things like, one person having an advantage over another, or one person being deceitful to another person. But this article is more theoretical, and I think harder to really implement as some kind of a policy. But I think it helps us to understand, the economic theory helps us understand the underlying issues here, and to help guide, I think, wise policy. So at the end of the article, Father Dempsey is laying out his perspective on the just price and what the best writing to that time, the article's, 50 years old or so, to that time had told us about the just price. And so we have this idea that the most important thing that Father Dempsey says is relevant to the just price is the use value of something. So a great example of this would be, let's say I've been in the desert for a week, and it's very hot, and I'm knocking on death's door, right? And you are in this, little oasis or this little town, and you have some water, right? And I'm crawling up out of the desert towards the town, and here you see me, and you think, aha, I have an opportunity here. I have this bottle of water in my hand, and I bet I could sell it to this guy for a ton of money. I bet he would pay all kinds of money for this bottle of water, because he is, he's on the brink of death. He's going to die if he doesn't drink something. So, you come to me and you say, hey, I'll let you have a drink of this bottle of water, but it's going to cost you $500, man. So is that just? Is that a just transaction if I pay you $500 for that bottle? And so number one, so we can think about the previous discussion that Mr. Gentile is telling us, right? So number one, that bottle of water couldn't have cost you more than $1 or $2 to procure, right? So we have a very high rate of profit in this transaction that probably isn't just. And number two, there's a sort of a power difference here, because you have me at a huge disadvantage, right? So maybe you're not being deceitful. I mean, we both know that a bottle of water costs about $2, right? But we also know that, in this situation, if there's no other source of water, well, you kind of have me at a disadvantage. So what am I supposed to do? Right. So from that perspective, clearly there's something wrong here. And from a use value perspective, right, that bottle of water is just as serviceable as a bottle of water to you or anyone else. I mean, that bottle of water might bring me back from the brink of death in this case, but it's still just a 20-ounce bottle of water. It's not anything. It's not anything special. Its usefulness is to sustain us, right? So that is the purpose of it, and that is its use. So Father Dempsey talks about use value as something that's objective. So it, and obviously it's changeable, right? So a certain volume of water could be serviceable as, something to help you clean your hands with, or something to use for you to drink water with. So, it in its use, in the differences of its use, it can have different use values. But so it's not inherent to the object itself necessarily, but it's inherent to the form that it takes. So if we put the water in a bottle and we make it drinkable and all these sorts of things, it has its use in that sense. Whereas if we put it in a pipe and put it in a sink, and maybe we put it with some soap or something, right, that's a different use, and so it would have a different value. And so you can see how, practically speaking, we have to figure out how to sort this out. But from a theoretical perspective, that use value isn't different just because someone is desperate to have it. So that's the first component. The second component he talks about is scarcity. So it's just how limited is the availability of this thing. And so if you studied economics at all, you kind of understand, this is a supply issue, right? This is an issue of the availability of something. And so that, again, Father Dempsey tells us, is an objective thing. It's not inherent to the subject. It's not inherent to the person making the transaction. And so scarcity, he says, is relevant. If something is very dear, something is very precious, then, and it's very limited, then we are justified in some sense in altering the price for that good. But we also have to think more systemically about this, right? So if the reason why that thing is scarce is because the policy regime itself, or certain specific policies within the government, make it scarce, and it shouldn't be scarce, well, then we have a different sort of problem. And we have to address that scarcity in a different context than simply thinking only about the price of it, right? So this is where I think it's perfectly fine to talk about price controls to an extent, and this is where Father Pesch, in his book, Ethics in the National Economy, talks about the just price as a range, right? We want to set a range on these things. And if that has certain consequences for surpluses or shortages, or if it has certain consequences for policy and incentives, then so be it, right? We have to, in the practical sense, have this range of prices that, at least for necessities, as Father Passionate points out, at least for necessities, we have to have this range of prices so that someone is able to provide for themselves. It's good for us to be able to work and provide for ourselves. And Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum makes very clear that it is good for us to work for what we have. We shouldn't just be on the dole. We shouldn't just be given money like the Marxists would want us to live our lives. So those are very important things. And so scarcity is the second. And then the third consideration is sort of the subjective estimation of the value of the thing. right? So that's the third component. So that one is subjective, Father Dempsey tells us, but it's also just one of the three components of this idea of a just price. And so, of course, when we're talking about, especially when we're talking about things that aren't necessities, it's certainly possible for the value of something to fluctuate over time. It's certainly possible for the value of something to fluctuate based on the subjective desire for that thing, from the buyer's perspective or the seller's perspective. And so those things are, that is certainly an important consideration when we're talking about the just price of anything. But again, I think we have to think about this in particular contexts, right? If we're talking about, merely something that's beautiful and that we like, or something that we enjoy, versus something that we need, something we must have to sustain our life, sort of in the ordinary fashion, for the society we find ourselves in, then we have to, I think, make adjustments, and we have to understand that the subjective component is not everything, right? The use value of the thing and its scarcity are also very important. And if we're talking about necessities, and again, it takes the wisdom of the political leader to determine what a necessity would be. If we're talking about necessities, then I think we're in a different position with respect to what that just price ought to be. So those are just some thoughts on the just price. And I'm going to put some links. I'm going to put a link to our just price article that we have, this position paper. I'm going to put a link to Father Dempsey's piece. I'm going to link to Ethics in the National Economy by Father Pesch. I'm going to really suggest that you pick that up because it's a fantastic book, and it really does a good job, I think, laying out some of these practical issues. I'll also link to Quadragesimo Anno and Rerum Novarum because I think those are super important to read and to understand the broader context of the just price. The just price isn't just a way of setting specifically what a price ought to be, right? It's not that. It's not the price control that you learn about in Econ 101. It's part of a broader policy regime that ensures that our work is productive for us and that we are able to provide for ourselves, at least for our necessities, in a way that is in accordance with the justice that God has laid out for us through the magisterium. And so I want to say thanks for listening. And again, if you have any questions or you want to talk with me, please send me an email and check out my interview with Timothy Flanders on the meaning of Catholic on his page on YouTube. Thanks for listening.